12-year-old girl Jacqueline Torres-García was allegedly restrained with zip ties and forced to lie on pee pads in her own home. And now a newly unsealed search warrant reveals even more horrifying details. Jacqueline's mother and others allegedly starved her, concealed her body, and even let another child impersonate her during a DCF check, apparently after this girl had already died. We are going to break down the latest chilling developments in this case with family law attorney Jennifer Roman. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Real quick, before we get going, this is a Law&Crime legal alert. There are allegations right now claiming that online apps like DraftKings, ESPN Bet, BetMGM, Bet365, Fanatics Sportsbook, Caesar Sportsbook, that they are engineered for addiction. These multi-billion-dollar companies allegedly continue to put profit over safety. Every small payout, free bet, boosted parlay, that can trigger a dopamine rush that creates dependency and a destructive habit. They can keep users hooked and trap people in a cycle that can lead to serious financial loss. Well, I'll tell you what, our legal sponsors are taking on the online gambling industry to seek justice and potential compensation. So if your loved one has struggled with addiction, financial hardship, or mental health issues due to sports betting apps, then visit gamblinglawsuits.com/sidebar to take a short quiz and check your eligibility to file a claim. Okay, we're back to this heartbreaking case out of Connecticut. We talked about it the other day. We've learned new information. This is where the body of 12-year-old Jacqueline Torres-García was found inside of a plastic tote behind an abandoned home in New Britain. And now we have this new update, okay? So Law&Crime has obtained a newly unsealed search warrant, and it reveals disturbing new details that investigators say they uncovered, including what happened after Jacqueline's death and how her body was moved. And this warrant also describes messages and photos that police say show the extent of the abuse, including one image that was allegedly sent by Jacqueline's aunt showing this 12-year-old girl zip-tied and lying on a pee pad. Now, we're going to break down what's inside this new warrant, how it changes what we know about this case, because what's laid out in these pages, it hits even harder when you understand where this story began, how a 12-year-old girl's life just slowly disappeared from view. So this, again, is Jacqueline Torres-García. For years, she attended school in New Britain. That was until August 26th of last year, when her mother, Karla Garcia, apparently suddenly withdrew her, saying that she'd be homeschooled instead. No one knew it then, but that was the last time anyone outside that home would ever see Jacqueline alive. And police now believe that in the months that followed, inside their Farmington apartment, Jacqueline was abused and starved and restrained. And investigators say this abuse continued through the fall of 2024, the same period they believe she died. But instead of reporting her death, detectives allege that Karla and her boyfriend, Jonathan Nanita, kept her body hidden, first in their basement and later when they moved to New Britain, inside this plastic storage tote that they brought with them. So months passed, no one reported her missing, and then you go to October 8th, 2025, and everything changed. You have this anonymous 911 caller who reported something suspicious that was going on. And it was behind this abandoned home on Clark Street in New Britain. When officers arrive, this is when they make a discovery that is horrifying, because that plastic tote, sealed shut, inside they find the remains of Jacqueline Torres-García. At a press conference, New Britain Mayor Erin Stewart said this.
As a mother, this makes me sick to my stomach to be standing here today with what we're about to tell you. On Wednesday, October 8th, when a report of suspicious activity at 80 Clark Street in New Britain came in from an anonymous caller requesting police, responding officers had no idea what they would be walking into. This caller reported suspicious activity at a known abandoned house in their neighborhood. This house had been vacant for over 2 years. And it was owned and is owned by an out-of-state landlord from New York. None of those determined to be involved with this case have ever resided at this property. I want to thank the initial caller for speaking up, for having the courage to say something. Without that initial call, no one can say for certain where we would be at this point in time.
And police have called this case exactly what it is: heartbreaking and disturbing.
35 years, this is probably one of the worst cases that we've had to, I think the facts that you have, that she probably died a long time ago and was stowed away, is probably enough to show you what we are dealing with here. So yes, very, very difficult on everybody handling these cases.
So within days, detectives announced 3 arrests here. Jacqueline's mother, Karla Garcia, she was charged with murder with special circumstances, conspiracy to commit murder, improper disposal of a body, tampering with physical evidence, unlawful restraint, intentional cruelty to a child under 19, and risk of injury to a child. Garcia's sister, Jacqueline Garcia, the aunt here, was charged with intentional cruelty to a child under 19, risk of injury, and first-degree unlawful restraint. Garcia's boyfriend, Jonathan Anita, was the last to be taken into custody, arrested the day after Karla and her sister. And once police confirmed his alleged involvement in Jacqueline's death, he was then charged with murder with a special circumstance, conspiracy to commit murder, risk of injury to a child, unlawful restraint, intentional cruelty to a child under 19. And while these arrests were unfolding, DCF's involvement in Jacqueline's life came under scrutiny. This is something we talked about, because according to newly released agency records, DCF first stepped in when Jacqueline was born back in 2013. This was after her mother was in detention. Jacqueline was placed with a paternal relative who became her legal guardian, and DCF closed the case later that year. You had intermittent involvement that followed over the years related to her younger sibling. The final pre-death contact came in September of 2022, confirming that the children were safe, that they were receiving care. And as I mentioned, in August of 2024, that's when Karla Garcia withdrew Jacqueline from public school, claiming that she would homeschool her. In January of 2025, DCF, they reopened contact due to concerns regarding Jacqueline's younger sibling. They arranged a video call with someone who presented as if they were Jacqueline. That's one of the weird aspects of this. This is, by the way, months after police say she had already died. DCF closed the case again in March of 2025 after there were really no concerns that were flagged. Years of family conflict over custody, that created additional tension in this story. Court records show that after initial placement with her paternal grandmother, Patricia Delgado, there were these custody disputes between Jacqueline's parents and relatives that continued for years. And after regaining custody, Garcia reportedly restricted family access to her daughter. But here is where the story takes a deeper and darker turn. This newly unsealed search warrant is offering a look inside what police say may have been happening in the weeks and months leading up to Jacqueline's death. So to help us break all this down, I want to bring on family law attorney Jennifer Roman. Jennifer, thank you so much for coming here back on Sidebar. This is a unique kind of case because from your experience, how common is it for a child to just disappear when maybe you don't have continual DCF oversight, like on a continual basis, but they were a part of this girl's life for quite some time? Is it uncommon to see something like this?
Unfortunately, no. And I think it's becoming more and more common. DCF reported that for at least a period of 2 years, if not more, they had no contact at all with the family. And that's because DCF said there was no reports of abuse, no concerns of abuse. They had previously provided services. Families seemed to be cooperating, and the court ultimately returned custody to little Mimi's parents, and DCF no longer had involvement with the family. The circumstance that makes this particularly unique, however, is that they homeschooled her and they pulled her out of the school system in her, right before the school year started in August of 2024. And Connecticut doesn't have any oversight over homeschooled children. So nobody had eyes on her after May of 2024 when she last saw her doctor.
Is it fair to say, hey, agencies, courts, they should have done something differently? If you have these repeated issues, these family disputes, these restrictions, that these were red flags. Is that a fair thing to ask or no?
It's definitely a fair thing to ask. And those are always questions that do get asked when we have something as horrific and tragic of an outcome as we do here.
Yeah, and what is the role, what is the responsibility of family members or caretakers in something like this? Obviously, hindsight's 2020, but is there anything more if someone's looking at a case like this that those around a child or those around a family should do?
Sure. I mean, you certainly start to wonder. Mimi was failed on so many levels, not only by the system, but by all the adults in her life, including family members and potentially neighbors and others in the community. Her maternal aunt told police she thought she was going to die in the fall, late summer, early fall of 2024 when she stopped living with the family. There had been a paternal grandparent who had had custody of Mimi and her siblings for 6 or 7 years because the parents were unfit and unable to care for her. So it does make you wonder what happened to those concerned adults, why they weren't seeing what was going on, or why there wasn't more red flags or issues of concerns raised. From what we can gather, Mimi was starved to death, and tortured and abused for an extended period of time. And so you do wonder where these other adults were, why they didn't say anything. I mean, the maternal aunt says, I knew she was going to die. The maternal aunt didn't bring anything to the authorities. So Mimi was just failed on so many levels. It's just truly tragic.
And now that aunt is facing her own criminal charges, which is, frightening to say. So I want to get into this search warrant affidavit. As I said, it's going to provide more details here. So the investigation takes this turn when police received a tip that would ultimately lead them to Jacqueline's remains. According to the affidavit, quote, on October 8th, 2025, the New Britain Police Department received an anonymous tip concerning the location of a possible dead body on Clark Street in New Britain. According to the complaints, Jonathan Nanita picked up a tote in the woods of a cemetery and put it in the back of his Acura. Jonathan Nanita then drove to 80 Clark Street in New Britain, where he removed the tote from the back of his Acura and left it on the property there. The complainants believe the tote would have contained a body. And by the way, the autopsy results confirmed the identity of that child, provided further context on her condition before death, because according to the affidavit, it says, Dr. Pasquale Stiles noted that there were no signs of recent trauma or injuries to her body that would have contributed to her death. Dr. Pasquale Stiles noted that Jacqueline appeared to be malnourished. And police, they quickly identified Karla, her sister Jacqueline, Karla's boyfriend Jonathan as potential suspects. And when Karla was interviewed by investigators, she allegedly made admissions about the abuse and neglect. According to the affidavit, she, Karla Garcia, and Jonathan Nanita stopped feeding Jacqueline for approximately 2 weeks prior to her death. Karla Garcia also admitted to previously restraining Jacqueline in zip ties as punishment when she was acting bad. This affidavit goes on to detail how the body was concealed following her death. According to the affidavit, quote, Karla Garcia stated Jonathan Nanita brought Jacqueline's body downstairs, but she wasn't sure what he did with it. Karla Garcia stated the odor from Jacqueline's decaying body was so strong they had to leave their residence in Farmington and stay with friends or at hotels. Karla Garcia later admitted that she knew Jacqueline's body was transferred to a tote and was put in the back of Jonathan Nanita's Acura. Karla Garcia admitted she knew the tote containing Jacqueline was transported to New Britain when they moved to 24 Clark Street at the end of March. Now, Jennifer, this is just a horrifying account. First of all, from a legal point of view, does it make sense how this girl died? Not the recent trauma, but the idea of not feeding her. I think we're getting a sense of what might have happened here.
Yes, the indication, the autopsy said there was no signs of trauma, but yet she appeared to be malnourished. And then we take that in conjunction with the mother's reporting that they would punish her by withholding food, by tying her up with zip ties. Karla admitted that they hadn't fed her for 2 weeks prior to her death in September of 2024. And we also have Karla's sister who said, and Karla herself, who admitted she received a photograph from her sister Jacqueline showing the child zip-tied and on the floor on wee-wee pads. You have the wee-wee pads you'd use for an animal, training a dog sort of thing. Just so horrific. But it was clearly an extended period of abuse and neglect for this young child to have died in the circumstances that she did.
It's inhumane. It's hard to even process this. I'm going to ask you a question that I want to be clear about this. I don't believe this, obviously, but you wonder what a legal argument would be. I wonder, in your experience, if this is an argument you've seen. I know that there's always, the goal is to have reunification of the biological family, always making sure a child stays with their biological parents. But at the end of the day, are you going to see an argument here, and I wonder if you've seen it before, look, we're allowed to discipline our child. It may be different, it may be unorthodox. Where does it cross the line? I would say not feeding your child for 2 weeks and zip tying them probably crosses the line. But have you seen that argument before? Hey, I'm allowed to slap. I'm allowed to put them on a wee-wee pad. I don't know. Is that something that you've seen before? Has that ever been successful? I'm not even sure that they would raise this argument, but I've seen it in other cases before, and I'm just curious your thoughts.
Yeah, we have seen other cases where somebody, the defendant sort of alleges that they were exercising their parental authority and how they chose to discipline a child, even if that discipline crossed the line into abuse or was clearly abusive. In a situation like this, however, I don't think that's the defense we're going to be seeing. I think Karla has already set herself up, according to the affidavit from the police, that it was her boyfriend who was inflicting the abuse and she was somehow helpless or powerless to prevent it. There appears to, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a drug history here. There's clearly a mental health history of some type, because I don't think any parent does this to their child unless there's something really wrong with them. They're in some sort of an altered state, whether that's because of abuse of substances or alcohol or because of mental health, or usually a combination of the two. So I think that Karla's defense is really going to try to set her up as the less culpable of the two between her and Jonathan. And Jonathan is the one who, removed the body, moved the body, just hid the body, took the body off the premises, moved the body back, abandoned the body. So in terms of, culpability argument, I think that's where we're going to go. Karla's going to try to distinguish herself and get herself a lesser sentence for the murder charges that she's facing, or maybe even try to get something like an involuntary manslaughter where she would have a lower sentence and really try to lay the blame on Jonathan as being the true perpetrator here. I don't know whether or not that's going to be successful her. We just don't know enough yet about the circumstances, but at first blush, I would say I don't think either one of these defendants have a shot. I think they're both, the evidence that the limited evidence that we already know is so overwhelming and damaging to them that I don't think we're really looking at a meaningful plea deal for either one of them.
And to be honest, there's two components to this, right? I mean, if they try to suggest that she died from natural causes, they could still potentially, but not even saying that would work, they'd still be potentially on the hook for concealing the body, right? And if you conceal the body, what does it say about your involvement? So there's two different separate points there. But also, I'll say this, as we're trying to say, was there an agency? Was there somebody that could have stepped in? I did wonder if one of the challenges when I read this warrant is it tough to say, to detect chronic neglect that may not on the surface be so apparent versus these acute, specific, visible injuries where you could see how a child is killed. Even if somebody was looking at Jacqueline or monitoring her, it may have been tough to know something was going on, right?
Yeah, I mean, according to the police reports, or DCF rather, they said that Jacqueline had last seen her doctor in May of 2024. When a child's sort of not in the community, the pediatrician becomes the first line of defense. So if the pediatrician wasn't noting any signs of neglect or abuse, then the red flags aren't going to be raised. And then we have this situation where they took her out of school and they said they were homeschooling her. So now we don't have the school and the teachers and the administrators getting their eyeballs on her. So she was very much isolated, which is a form of abuse in and of itself. But that to me shows the intention and the premeditation of the mother and father. They were taking strategic steps to isolate Jacqueline, to keep her out of the world's view, to keep her out of the system, right? They knew what DCF would do. They knew what was involved. They even took it a step further that when DCF came in to investigate her younger sibling, they said, mother said Jacqueline's visiting family out of state, and they made someone available for a video conference. That someone wasn't Jacqueline. But does DCF know when they haven't dealt with this, they haven't seen this child in 2 years, and they see a child over video conference, can they really discern whether or not that's still the same child or not? Probably not. I mean, children grow and change so much between the ages of 9, 10, 11, and 12, and they had limited contact with the family to begin with. So, the parents here really took a lot of steps to keep this under wraps, to keep this out of the agency's purview. And that just made it that much harder for DCF in this situation to be able to really assess what was happening.
And you mentioned the aunt. So the affidavit highlights what police say was the role of Jacqueline's aunt in documenting this alleged abuse, because according to the affidavit, it reads, Karla Garcia admitted that her sister, Jacqueline Garcia, sent her a photograph of Jacqueline when she was lying on the floor on pee pads, restrained in zip ties. Karla Garcia stated she didn't have the photograph on her phone as she now had a new phone. Okay, now Jennifer, that's remarkable, that aspect of it, the aunt, the sister here, right?
Yeah, I mean, the sister clearly knew that there was something horribly wrong with this situation and the treatment of her niece, and she didn't do anything. I mean, she sends a picture to the mother, but the mother is perpetuating the abuse. The mother's part of the abuse equation here. She didn't go to the police. She didn't go to the authorities. And one has to wonder, why not?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have an answer for that. I really don't. I will say this. Investigators, they apparently obtained additional admissions from Karla Garcia. And I think that's going to really complicate the case because it regards her actions, her intentions after Jacqueline's death. According to the affidavit, it reads, Karla Garcia also admitted that she told her sister, Jacqueline Garcia, that Jacqueline died on September 19th, 2024. Karla Garcia also told Detective McGeough that most of the punishments towards Jacqueline were under the direction of Jonathan Nanita, and that he handled her body after she died. Detective McGeough relayed that Karla Garcia shared she was about to go on a podcast prior to her arrest, where she was going to share the story of what happened to Jacqueline. Detective McGeough stated Karla Garcia told him she wrote notes of the story on her cell phone so she could reference them for the podcast. Now, this is something we've talked about, Jennifer, in the previous episode of Sidebar. It's just a weird detail, but you're right. I mean, this idea of putting the blame on someone else, and I guess the argument would be, I was scared. There's only so much I could do. I was in this relationship, or I was with this person where I couldn't stop what happened. I was scared for my own life. I mean, I'm not saying that's necessarily what she's coming up with here, but seeming to put the emphasis on him. What do you make of this?
I think that's her only shot at getting a reduced sentence, is to somehow blame Jonathan, make him more culpable. I suspect I'm an addict. Jonathan abused me. There was a level of coercive control or physical and emotional abuse going on as well. So I was helpless to help. And I was compromised by my addiction issues or my substance abuse issues. I wasn't able to think rationally and clearly. This has sort of got the underpinnings for those kinds of arguments. I don't think they're going to be effective, but that would be the only defense that she could really mount from what we're seeing so far.
And this idea of, I guess, you were going to document or publicly recount what happened in a podcast?
So bizarre. That is just one of the most bizarre facts of this case. And why? I mean, you're going to go publicly and say, oh, my child was starved and abused and zip tied, and that helps her how? I mean, that's where I kind of come back to, how compromised is her ability to think and to act, and is that going to play into her defense? Because it's just such an odd fact. It's just so bizarre.
You know, there's an aspect to this where you think about when this girl died and how long it takes to find out something like this happened. I don't know if every case is like this, but is this an outlier to you?
You know, unfortunately, we've been hearing more and more of these situations where a child is chronically abused, tortured, malnourished, and it ultimately leads to their death. I'd like to think it's isolated. I'd like to think that this really doesn't happen, but I think we've heard about this in the news. There's been a couple of these cases in the last 6 to 9 months, and it's just deeply disturbing, just so disturbing.
Well, Karla Garcia and Jonathan Nanita, they remain behind bars on $5 million bonds. Jacqueline Garcia is being held on a $1 million bond. They're due back in court on November 14th. Obviously, this is the second time we've been covering it. If something should develop, if we learn more information, we'll make sure to stay on top of it here on Sidebar. Jennifer Roman, thank you so much for taking the time. It was good to see you.
You're welcome. Take care.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.